Hey everybody, this is Captain Frugal reporting for duty, and I'm not here alone. I'm here with an awesome guest today, the Full Custom Hot Dog. And he does audio work, and we're going to talk about some of his music, how he records it, maybe some of the inspiration behind it, and just really have a nice musical chat. So I want to say hello, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, if you don't mind, I love to get behind the scenes, behind the person, if you will. And what I want to know is what inspired you to start making music?
Gosh, it's hearing good music. I think like anything else for a lot of people, right? You see something and you go like, that's really cool. I want to be able to do that. So I mean, I played piano growing up, and then as I got older, played guitar because that was way cooler. And then girls love that. And then I started playing in bands. And then I stumbled on electronic music in like eighth grade, hearing the Prodigy with like Firestarter that got huge. And I was always like, I want to do that.
Okay, so mine was similar too. I listened to things I thought was awesome, and it made me want to play it. I'm very mediocre on piano, major and minor chords, but I love that you mentioned the piano there. I think piano is something that every musician should learn, and that seems like a hypocritical because I don't know it that well, but I am working on it. I was something I want to get better at. My wife played piano at first too, as a segue. I think she had to play on it for 4 years, and now she plays the harp. That thing's got like
Ooh.
52 strings, and I tell her that's a whole lot more strings than I can handle.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, it's important, right? Piano has a lot of your fundamentals. You're taking a piano class. They usually teach like sight reading. You kind of learn chord structure. It's easier to visualize, I think, how chords work on piano than it is guitar.
Yeah, and I also found another little interesting nugget you mentioned is it helps you pick up chicks.
Yeah, right.
you know,
They like it.
and I think so. I don't know if it does as much today as it did back when I was in high school and things, because I'm a little bit older, in my mid 40s, and back then you played in a band, you were like cool, and
Yeah.
so and I will say it worked.
Although, my first gig was a keyboardist in a prog rock band, so that wasn't as cool as maybe anything else I could have been. So,
And was that music? Well, was that music cool at your school or?
no, absolutely not. This was probably like late 90s, early 2000s. So everyone was like, I'm from San Diego. So Blink 182 is from out here, and pop punk was also huge at the time. So that's where everyone's head was at.
Okay. Oh, and that's a little different in your music. Explain to me, if you would, if you could characterize your music, what would you call it?
I usually tell people it's, gosh, at the risk of sounding pretentious, I guess, I usually say it's like vocal driven synth rock, pseudo industrial, because sometimes it gets kind of dark. But it's usually synthy. I don't like terms like synthwave and stuff because I think that's too pigeonholy. And I think I'm kind of a blend of a few things, so it's kind of hard to mention just one without saying a few.
Sure, absolutely. How about I play a little bit of the song I believe you have is called "For a Ride"? Is that correct?
Yeah.
All right, so let me put a little bit of music on there, maybe, and then we can even turn it down a little bit if you want and talk over it. But here's a little of that. "For a Ride."
Let me take you for a ride, dancing with the lights. Our hearts beating like a drum tonight. Let's go crazy, my baby, dancing with the lights. Together we could chase the sun tonight. Let me take you for a ride, dancing with the lights. Our hearts beating like a drum tonight.
All right, I'm going to turn that down a little bit so we could have a chat. So I'm guessing that's not you singing.
No, that's not me singing, and I can't remember the name of the vocalist. So, if you ever get electronic music production, you buy packs of samples and loops and stuff. And some people craft their whole music out of loops. Some people only use certain things. I tend to use the beat and sometimes vocals. I sing on a lot of my stuff, but when I heard this, I was already crafting the song, and the song was pretty much done. And I was poking around. I was like, oh, maybe I got some little cool vocal oohs and ahs, and this just like fit perfect. So I put it in there. and it's from some sample pack. I could probably look up who the actual vocal is, but they release in these packs and you can use it royalty free.
Yeah, well, and there is. Let's be fair here. Pretty much all music is using sampling packs today.
Oh, tons.
For keyboard, for guitar, for bass guitar, for drums. I mean, technically, you look,
Drums
most people
especially.
are using all kinds of drum beat programs and stuff. They're just samples that are being taken and you can tweak and use. So.
Well, when everyone starts out in like electronic production, it's always like, oh, they're using loops. Never me. No. And then as people start to progress, they always end up using loops. You know.
Oh yeah, and, I've used some for keyboard stuff, and I played some my own, but sometimes I just use them for inspiration, especially with the drums.
Yeah.
I'll throw on some
Oh,
drum
yeah.
beats at a speed that I want, work on the guitar and bass line, and then I'll go from there, because you can always, once you got the timing signature down, pretty much, you can pretty much substitute anything
It
as long as
helps
you're
a
on time.
lot, a ton to have something to jam to. I tend to layer mine, so at least it beefens them up a little bit when you have that loop track, and then you set your own samples over it, and it makes it a little bit bigger, and it also makes you go like, well, that's some of my beat on top of this other beat, you know.
Yeah, I prefer using that over a click track any day.
Oh, definitely.
Something a little more interesting. So you don't remember the vocalist name, so do you remember how you got the
Mm-mm.
vocalist?
It was just in a random pack. I use splice.com, which is like a subscription service. You get X amount of tokens that you can use to download X amount of samples. So I'll just go through and just start pulling random samples and stuff, and they just sit in this huge folder.
Oh,
Got a big folder for that, big folder for different sounds and stuff that I kind of mix up together.
well, you know what that means? That it means that I actually was mistaken there, even on how you got the vocals. I thought you got somebody that the vocals were even loops then, correct?
The vocals are loops. The only thing that are loops are the vocals and the beat. And then so normally whenever I write a song first, I start out with like the plucks that you hear, the arpeggios.
Okay.
And so pretty much all my songs start with arpeggios because that's always my foundation, and then I build from there. So that's mine, the bass is mine, and then I'll add in the beat, layer the beat, and then I found the vocal to sit in there.
Wow, that's cool. That's neat. And so you're pretty much doing everything yourself then, correct?
Yeah.
Have you? Well, I know you have some, but have you recorded much with a band?
I used to play in a band, probably like, gosh, 3 or 4 years ago. I have this one friend that I collaborate with. His name's God Particle. It's his like DJ name and stuff. He also produces. Good friends for like 15 years or so. But we kind of put together a band, and we were both like, this is our last attempt at doing a band. And if this doesn't work out, we're never doing a band again. So we did a band, practiced and played for about a year, and then our drummer moved. So we were like, okay, well, no more band.
For a lot of people don't realize how hard it is to get a really well functioning band. You got to get people on the same page, wanting to do the same general kind of music. Because a lot of people, especially if they're playing at bars and things like that, they just think, well, I play a bit of everything. You are completely unmarketable then. And that's a challenge. You have to have a sound, so you got to have people in agreement. And then they all have to be responsible. It seems like it's always hard to get that at least one player in the band to be responsible. Like the bass player, is fine with you having to pick him up all the time because he doesn't have a car.
Oh yeah, it's a big relationship, right? Like it makes me wonder how people, not to go too off topic, but how people even do something like polyamory or something. You got this big relationship of 5 people. Like I don't know how I couldn't even do that in a band, let alone in a personal life. Like it's insane.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I did it for a lot of years. I got very, very, incredibly lucky that the first song I wrote got record label attention. I was like, are you kidding me? But it was also a double-edged sword because they're like, we were interested in you. Can you send us more? I'm like, not really, because I only know a couple chords.
So what'd you do?
I hurried up and sent them some more, and I got an offer. I didn't accept it. I actually ended up getting another offer later on and didn't accept that either. A lot of people didn't realize, I think back then, that a record deal isn't always good. They usually screw the artist really bad.
You hear stories, right? Like I remember hearing stories of Faith No More going on tour and like having to panhandle for burritos and stuff.
Yeah, and so people don't realize how much easier it is today. Because back then, you probably did need a label to really help you, but the only way to get a record deal and a record label is to prove you didn't need them in most cases. So that's why I was completely blown away. I did accept an endorsement deal through Peavey, so I
Oh,
was able to get.
sweet.
I didn't have the top tier endorsement. That's another thing. Some people don't realize that not endorsements are all the same either.
Yeah.
If you're like Van Halen, they're making stuff for you and giving you stuff. For me, I wasn't quite that high a tier. They gave me everything at a discount and no shipping charge. So I got everything under probably their manufacturing price is probably what I got it at, which still was an astronomical savings. So
Yeah, still a good deal.
yeah, so that was nice. It made me happy at the time, and and even then, the social media thing wasn't there. We didn't have Facebook and Twitter. We had later on we had MySpace, but which that makes me old.
But you know what? Even with all the social media, right? You would think it would make it easier, but it's just as hard or harder even because now there's just everybody like y- random tweets and stuff you'll hear like listen to my SoundCloud. Like nobody's listening to all these SoundClouds that people are posting. Barely anyone even uses SoundCloud, you know?
Yeah, well, yeah, there's so much there, and that's one of the reasons I was getting on that subject is because you're using social media to get your stuff out there. So I want you to tell everybody where they can get a hold of the song we just played, some as well as some of the other ones we're going to look at a little bit later.
So my artist name is Geist OverDrive. You can find me on Bandcamp under that, Spotify. I'm pretty much anywhere that music streaming, pretty much.
He's out there. Excellent. And today, as we're discussing, it's just so it's we have so many options now. Like you could do everything yourself with the loop stuff. Because let's be honest, when I started, when I started, you were on reel to reel or tape, but but you couldn't. You didn't have those loops and things, so you had to learn every instrument. And let's be honest, to learn drums well enough, guitar, bass guitar well enough, and keyboards, that's a lot to learn. And it took a lot of skill, and it showed. Or in vocals too. Let's be honest, that the vocals something that some people just don't want to think it's an instrument. You have to practice that as well.
Yeah, yeah. And that's why learning like keyboard, piano is important, right? Especially if you want to get into digital production, because then you can play every instrument with your keyboard.
Absolutely. So speaking about production, what are you using to produce? Like maybe the software, some general hardware that you like to use to produce the kind of music you do.
I use Reason, which is one of the digital music creating software that like nobody talks about. It's not that big. It's kind of niche, but I like it because it emulates a hardware rack. So when you look at it, you know, you have if you've ever seen like analog keyboard setups and analog modules and stuff, Reason looks like that, and then you can hit tab. It'll flip it around, so you can actually have virtual cables, so you can physically or virtually rewire things however you want.
Well, for being old school, I could, I can't say I've used Reason to make me want to consider checking it just for that reason.
That's exactly why I got into it because I was into analog keyboards back in the day, and then once I saw that interface, I was like, "Oh man, that's so cool!" Like that makes it a little easier for me. And looking at some of the other ones, they do it differently, and it doesn't completely make sense to me. A lot of people use Ableton. I use Ableton for live performances, so I'll trigger my tracks, and then I sing live, so I'll use different vocal filters and stuff because I like disguising my voice and things like that. Um, so I can do all that with like a sampling pad and MacBook with Ableton for live performances, but Reason for production.
Okay. And another thing too is you can do so much now with a computer that you couldn't do with before. You don't need the most up-to-date current computer. Yeah, sure, you can do more with it. But I mean, you don't need the most powerful. For example, in my studio, uh I I can't think of even what computer it is. It's a Dell one, but it's not a super powerful one. I think I have 16 meg of RAM in it, and I've ran probably 90 something tracks with lots of effects, and I still have never had an issue.
Yeah.
it, when I first started, as I said, we didn't have the computer recording stuff. I remember we first had one. I'd run it through like the Sound Blaster audio card to check it out. It's like, oh my goodness, this is different, but it's awesome with the capabilities. But still, back then, I think I was using maybe a Pentium 2 or a Pentium 4.
Oh yeah. Really, it doesn't get too heavy until you start getting to some of the more complicated synths. Like if you look at a lot of the synths now, they start using samples. They integrate like what's called like a wavetable, I believe, where it'll take a sample and you can kind of choose what part, and then it just starts running all these maths and algorithms across the sound to like tweak every part of it. And you can get some really big sounds, but it's also going to eat up a lot of processing power.
I use Reaper. I find it very efficient in space that it takes up. I find it pretty
Yeah.
easy to use. For example, like the routing of the hardware, outboard gear and stuff. There's just enough. You click in there for that, and there's it's not actually an effect, but you can click it right through there and choose. I think it's shoot. I think can't think of what it is. Insert. I think is what it is. And heck, I even use it sometimes for live stream, or not live stream, but streaming things to record, because they have a stream feature through there and things. It's just
Really?
yeah,
That's cool.
and the price is so cheap. I mean, a lot of people use it free forever, but if you actually pay $60 and have it legit, rather than but you can test it for free forever if you really wanted to.
That's usually the one I send people to because they've got a great entry point, right? Free with no locks on things. I think you can just use it, and then if you want to pay for it, it's $60. Like you can't beat it, you know?
Yeah, the only difference you'll have is it won't say evaluation license at the top, and when you use the evaluation, I think you have to wait like 4 seconds while it's on that. It says still evaluating for that to count down. A great entryway, but I'm gonna have to check into Reason. You know, that's got me interested to see it with the routing cables and all that. That's
Take a
awesome.
look at it too, because you can also use it. I think now you can use it as a plugin in Reaper and other DAWs and stuff.
Awesome.
So they made it a little bit more versatile.
So speaking of versatile, why don't I try play a little bit of another one of your songs for us so people could check this one out. Let's see here. I'm gonna widen my window so I can read the full name here. Try not to get it wrong. Dusk Cities? Dusk
Yeah.
City. Okay. Let's try that one. So there we have some of that one there, that Dusk City, if you will. Gotta get my names right. Now, and you play these live too, then?
With them, I'd usually trigger them live. I normally don't play the instrumental ones. That way, I can at least be singing or something. I would throw this in like a DJ set if I did a DJ. I don't really like DJing that much, but if I did a DJ set, this would go in there.
I think about almost. It seems like a lot of us musicians have done DJing work.
Yeah.
I was more the rock and DJer though. I didn't do dance beats a whole lot, but sometimes you get people. So I do it a lot of. If I did events, I'd do parties and stuff like that where I could get away with that kind of stuff.
Well, when I first got into production, I wanted to make dance music, and I just could never make dance music like ever. It always everyone was like, "Oh, that sounds like a video game," or they'd say, "Oh, that sounds like an '80s song."
Yeah,
And this was before like '80s was cool again.
yeah, I was gonna say, what's wrong with a video game? I mean, video game music's huge now.
Yeah, but no one's gonna book you at a club if you sound like that.
Yeah, that's true.
So that was like a big issue. And then I eventually said, you know what? I'm done trying to make dance music. I'm obviously not able to do it, but I am able to make music. So I just kept making whatever I felt like.
Awesome. So let's talk about a little bit of fun. Have a little fun with the live discussion, Chad, of playing live, because your experience could be different than mine. Because I never did much electronic music with backing tracks. I was usually with a band playing, and I will say that like the movie Spinal Tap seems so realistic. But so how about you? Maybe I think I find it. I don't know why I find this funny, but the horror stories. Do you have a horror story of playing an event something went wrong?
No, I'd always just get a lot of stage fright. So there was one show we were playing at a club. Me and my buddy, when we were DJing, we were playing at this club, I think for like 1 or 200 people, and I was super nervous. Like I never got nervous playing instruments because I always felt like, okay, I know how this works, right? It's my guitar that's
Mhm.
plugged into my amp, and that as long as there's electricity, I'm fine, right?
Yeah.
With DJing, for me, it's like, okay, well, now I gotta hope my computer doesn't crash. I gotta hope that these things plug in correctly, that I'm not having one of these like 10 points of failure. So I always get a ton of stage fright before going up. And then so before that show, I like threw myself into an elevator and I just kept dry heaving until I was like ready to go.
So there's nothing left to let it go.
It was so bad.
I don't think a lot of people realize too. Even if you're seasoned and been playing a long time, there's still usually a lot of nerves, and that's one of the reasons why people that play and big artists and things even get hooked on drugs and things. Sometimes they do it to try to ease them a little bit and get them going, which I don't recommend doing, mind you, but a lot have. And unfortunately, that I'm not saying you ever did that, by the way, or I didn't either. Last thing I wanted to do is impair myself because then I'd play even worse.
I won't even drink before I play. Like I won't have a sip of alcohol because I'm just too afraid that that's going to cause me to mess up, you know?
I wish more would have that
Afterwards,
attitude.
whatever.
Because I've seen so many bands and worked with so many in the past that think, oh, I need a couple to make me good. It's like, no, you don't. It actually makes you worse. It's like going, I'm going to be technical and have a job that have a lot of technical aspects, but I'm not going to be at my A game because I'm drinking. It's just something you got to work through. Eventually, I have to say that energy of nervousness actually was excitement for me. I'd get ramped and I'd get pumped and I loved it. And then when something goes wrong, it crashed and burned.
Yeah. Then you just don't know what to do, right?
Yeah, I mean, the very first time I played in public, it was a crash. it was we were just one of the many opening bands. We were only going to play a short set. I think it was 5 or 6 songs tops. And so when you're doing that, there's a lot of gear in the shuffle. A lot of people are setting up and they have to hurry up and tear down and everything else of that nature. And doggone it, I at that one I was playing bass guitar, and we thought we were ready. We had everything set up because our stuff was a little bit in the back, so other people set up. But evidently, when somebody else set up their stuff, they disconnected my bass amp, the head from the
They
cab.
sabotaged you?
I don't think it was on purpose. I
Oh, that's
really
hope
don't.
talking.
But you never know. It could have been sabotage because there was a band there that had some members in it that I was in at one point, but we didn't stay together. So maybe it was sabotage. But I go to hit it right off the bat and I had nothing. It's like, oh, come
Oh,
on. And a lot of people don't realize too, you can't run an amp head without a cab for very long.
yeah.
That will fry your head. So that just screwed me the whole thing. Like, well, I'm out. So the first show, I had nothing going. And I had a lot of good ones too. But I love sharing horror stories because sometimes I think people need to realize it happens to everybody and it happens a lot.
Oh yeah. You're not you're not a live performer until you've had something just go completely wrong, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy for you. It sounds like the DJing and things you didn't have many issues with and stuff and playing that's a great thing.
Nothing too crazy, but with it, there's just less to worry about, right? I don't have to worry about 5 people, 5 different audio setups, and everything that comes through with that. It's just me, a program, and some buttons.
Have you played some pretty large shows, pretty intimidating ones, or?
Nothing too crazy. I played at a little festival once, and that was really cool because it was on a stage with like a lot of DJs that were performing. So I was like somebody coming up with electronic stuff with live vocals. We were like, whoa, this is kind of weird, you know?
Yeah. Now when you say festival, I'm with that kind of music, I would think indoor, but was this outdoor?
Yeah, it was like so I have a group of friends that are basically do burner events, which are like Burning Man related.
Mm-hmm.
So this was kind of like a little Burning Man junior event. outside in the woods. There were, gosh, I don't know, 6, 7 stages, probably a little bit more. So you can just kind of walk around anytime, and there's always something happening.
Awesome. Well, Smart Man does a one-man show. He doesn't have to worry about managing all that other stuff, splitting things. Yeah, I think that's a
Being
good
in
way to
some
go.
bad bands will do that to you, you know?
Oh yeah. I've had my fun. I will say I've contemplated doing the band thing again, but with kids and at my age, it's just ah. I look at other avenues for music to have fun. Like now, I record stuff and I put it on my Patreon so people can use it as background music for videos or whatever, or ringtones. Eventually, I'm going to put vocals on some of them. I've got them written and some of them done, but I'm actually redoing my studio. I ripped all the floor out, and I'm like 6 months behind where I wanted to be. But I
Oh
ripped out all
man.
my floor, so now I got to put it all in again and then put in all the sound treatment again, and so I'm a bit behind. So I don't want to do the vocals until the sound treatment's done.
Oh yeah. And you know, nowadays you could just do everything yourself. I think if I ever wanted anything, it'd be like a live bassist. Like I got a buddy who's really good at bass, so I always think about sending him stuff to play bass too.
Mhm. I've been
But
teaching my son, so
it's good.
yeah, I think my next move would be my daughter with the I want her to learn piano, and I'm hoping maybe I can mooch off of her a little bit because I don't want my wife to teach me. Shame on me. That's awesome. Well, maybe we should preview another song a little bit. This next one is called Melt. You want to tell us anything about Melt?
Melt is like the first. This is gonna sound like I'm full of myself, but it's like the first good song I wrote. Like, you know, you start out and you're just writing like a bunch of like, yeah, that's cool, that's neat. But this was the first song that I had confidence in. That I was like, man, I actually think this is a song people would listen to on purpose. You know?
Yeah, well, I get it. I've wrote tons of garbage, and
Yeah.
I remember with my most popular band that I was with, and we had this song, and it was like, oh my gosh, people are wanting this song, they're requesting this song, and it's moving, and it's a thrill. So absolutely. Okay, so this is your first one you thought that really moved the mark. So here we go. I was gonna play a little bit of Melt. Oh, by the way, any noise anybody was hearing, it's because I have a fan on because it's hot. So I tried to turn down my mic then while this is going. So here we go. Melt. All right, there's a little bit of the song Melt there. Very cool. All right. So with that said, so you said this is the first one that you thought really got you. You thought this one could hit, huh?
I just was like, oh, this is something that people wouldn't be opposed to hearing, you know? Like this is a song I would have confidence in showing people. I think it's pretty solid. It was also made before, so back in the day with Reason, right? Like I mentioned how everything's kind of like racks and rack mounts and all that. Um, all the instruments were very closed. So you really only had X amount of instruments. You couldn't import new ones. And so this was all made with like stock Reason stuff.
Okay.
So that was also like a big deal that I felt like I could get that with that too, you know.
Well, you mentioned limitations, and I scratched my head on it because I love having all this now at my fingertips so much more than I ever had before. But sometimes the limitations were beneficial. I mean, uh, you know, when you started, you had like 4 tracks. If you go to big
Yeah.
studios, you might have 8, and I did that. I hit the those expensive studios. One of the reasons I started recording myself is because we had a bass player. Just every time he hit record, he freaked and ruined everything, and it just wasn't getting done. And I go, well, we're just gonna record it ourselves. And I did not realize at that time how big of a undertaking that was. Uh, Cost wise, it was astronomical. skill wise too, I didn't have it, so it took a large learning curve. I couldn't afford a reel to reel, so I had a 4-track cassette deck, system, and it went up from that to an 8-track when they had 8 tracks, and people they're seeing it now. I see this like on Reverb, people are going like classic audio, analog audio, and I'm like, that is not what they're talking about when they talk
Dude,
about
every
analog.
once in a while, I'll take a look for those blue. I don't know if you remember those blue 4-track Tascams. It felt like everybody had because they were like $80,
Yeah,
$60. Those things are often over 200 now.
yeah, it's ridiculous because
And I want one because I always want to. I love lo-fi sound, so I often think about recording on actual cassette tape and 4 tracks and stuff. But at that price, I just can't do it. Not something I know is so cheap.
Well, other avenues to look to if you want to lo-fi your recording a little bit. Two particular ones is one guy when I first started getting into recording, and I learned he actually set up a couple tape cassette recorders, and he built a booth, and he would record one, and then he would play it back, and then on another deck while he's playing live, he'd record that. And he'd do that. It gave him all that lo-fi sound. Another way is just using a VHS player, VCR or whatever. That could get you that lo-fi sound
Weird.
too. Yeah, so you can record into those. And actually, I recorded that way for a while because it was better audio quality using VHS than a cassette tape.
Really?
Yeah. So you could do a little bit better, especially with a nice hi-fi VHS player. And so if you want that lo-fi sound by today's standards, that's still quite lo-fi. But yeah, so I went from there, learned on the 4 tracks, learned 8-track, and then they started getting the digital stuff. Or actually, it was ADAT, but I could not afford the ADAT. But then they started getting the cheaper digital stuff, and I tried that. I got into that with a digital 8-track, and then I had until I started recording again and rebuilding my studio. I was recording with Roland 2480. So, and those are awesome. I mean, it was like a computer with 24 tracks and automated faders. And I thought, this is all I'll ever need. And then I realized, wow, I record stuff now with like 80 something tracks.
Yeah, with infinite tracks.
Yeah, and it's still so much easier. Don't get me wrong, that Roland still sounds great, had a lot of great tools in it, but I with a couple clicks on my mouse and plugins and everything else, it's just been astronomical now. Like you're using, all these waveforms and everything else. They're a lot better than they used to be.
My favorite part is I'm like, okay, I want to make music. I just open up my MacBook and I can sit on my bed. I just make music,
There's something to be said about that. That's one of the things in a good studio, is it's set up that if you have inspiration, you can just hit record and start going. You don't have to start routing a bunch of cables and all that crap, because it takes time. And with today at your desktop, your laptop, you could actually set up a lot of that. I mean, I use a patch bay and I have everything routed, so I have a lot of them. I just click there, like for example, if I want to reamp, I always have it going out one channel, so I just select that output and reamp it, and so it's so much easier. But there lies the other problem: is when you have infinite stuff, it makes it a little harder to commit to things. So that was my next question with you. With this kind of music and all the sounds that you can use, do you ever have trouble committing to a sound and saying, okay, this is what it's going to sound like, and I'm going to move on?
Only if there's maybe a certain style, maybe every once in a while I get stuck, but because I really like analog sounds and that kind of stuff, that tends to be my starting point anyway.
You do reamp, correct or no?
What do you mean by reamp?
Oh, okay. Well, say you take a dry track, a dry guitar, or you could take just maybe a standard piano sound or anything, and you reroute that sound out and maybe run it through something else. So, for example, like I'll record a dry track and with a different guitar amp at one time, and I might go, I want a different guitar sound, so I might run it through run the output of that through my reamping and run it through another amp and just record it again, so I don't have to replay it again. The performance.
Nothing quite like that. I'll nail down like a MIDI and then I'll kind of layer whatever effects I might want on it.
Okay, so you're still mainly doing it in the box then, rather than
everything's in the box.
right. And so you could say, okay, I use this piano sound, and then maybe try this piano sound.
Yeah.
Or this. And do you ever find yourself into like you're doing like, well, I've tried 35 different ones now. I need to commit.
Every once in a while. And then, I have so many songs that those will just go back. I'll just throw it back there and I'll work on something else. I don't think you can really break through those by forcing yourself to get through those writer blocks or hoping for the right sound to come along. I'll revisit it later.
Sure. One of the things I like to talk about and tell people too is that you don't have to have an astronomical amount of money anymore to start recording. Because I go right back. That's why I like to give a little of my history. When I started, it would cost you thousands of dollars just to sound like crap.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, to really sound good, it's tens of thousands of dollars. So I did it on my Tascam, and my maybe $100 microphone. When I stepped it up to that, it still sounded, compared to the standards, like crap. Whereas for today, in all honesty, for $200, you're probably good to start.
It's not too bad to get your foot in the door on it for sure, but it just starts coming down to like, well, I'm hearing people like, for at least what I do, right? It's like, okay, you hear people talk about these synths, these are really good.
Mhm.
Okay, well, you want these mastering plugins, so you start looking towards that. So it really kind of just depends on what avenue you're going to take.
That's true. I agree with you there. I've been building on mine. I don't run the most. As I try to tell people, if you're getting started, you could probably go. Most people can be fine with a 2-input audio interface.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
even Behringer is making ones that sound great, which is,
Yeah.
so for $100 there, I recommend maybe getting an SM57, great all around mic to get going, and your mic cable, and then a decent set of headphones. I don't recommend mixing in the headphones, but if that's the way you have to start, by all means, especially if you don't have room treatment and stuff, it's going to really make a big difference. So you're talking $200, $250, unless you spend a lot of money on headphones. I usually go about $100, and you're good to go to make. And the music you can make, if you know what you're doing good enough and can record good enough, is good enough to be putting out there and comparable to everything else.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And there's so many tutorials out there on YouTube and everything to kind of help you get started and really dial in whatever you're looking to do.
Now you mentioned all these things that you can go on and plugins and all that and buy. Have you found yourself going down the rabbit hole, spending a lot of money on plugins and things?
I used to. I don't anymore because I don't know. I feel like how many delays do you really need, right? Like I kind of realize I'm using the same delay unit all the time. I don't need more. I kind of have a lot of the sounds that I want. I have so many sounds that I don't really need to look for either presets or synths really. Something might catch my eye every once in a while, but for the most part, I think I'm pretty set. I don't master a whole lot. Like I don't really have much of a process, so I don't care about anything for that. So pretty basic stuff, I guess, now.
Yeah, that's one of the things I try to tell people. There's a lot of good free plugins too. So
Oh,
you
there's a
try
ton.
find what you want. Heck, Reaper inside of it comes with a really great set of plugins that are very usable right from the start. And I won't say you wouldn't build up on those, but eventually you might build into some. I've bought MIDI packs, and things like that to utilize. That's been helpful.
Yeah.
I paid for a few. The plugin that the software that I most recently bought. I'm really glad that I did, and that was Ozone Isotope
Mhm.
9 for mastering. And matter of fact, I did a video on it. Everyone checks it out. Holy cow, is mastering easier using that than what it used to be.
Ozone has some, or Isotope has some great stuff for music production. I usually recommend people check out. Gosh, I think it's called Stutter Edit is pretty good. For people doing electronic music, and it kind of lets you add some cool, not just filters, but they're good for transitions and stuff. And also vocal synth is really good too if you want like a vocoder sound, but not as rigid.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing it. I think, and here's the thing: you don't have to be pigeonholed in one kind of music. You can use that kind of stuff in all kinds of music, and that's why I think some of us get in trouble now. Is even though we have more options than ever before, you find that we gravitate towards a certain kind of music, and we want, oh, I want that sound, and so now you may use that sound, and you sound like everybody else, even though you have all these
Yeah.
options not to sound like somebody else. And I'm guilty of that too.
I think everybody is, right? You kind of take your influences and what grabs you and you sort of try to reappropriate it for yourself, right?
Yeah. And so it can be. rabbit hole with these patches and all this stuff that you can buy. But I will say I really do enjoy using that mastering software. I just got the standard, and usually it's like 250 something dollars, and they put it on sale once in a while for like 159, and I still was holding back. It's like, I don't want to pay that much, and they put it on sale a little while ago for 99 bucks. I was like, I'm doing it, and I did that, and I got it, and what I would normally spend a couple hours on mastering, I put it in there, and with a couple clicks, I mean just mere minutes, it's like this sounds just as good as how I mastered it.
I've heard pretty good things about it. Oh, can you hear this gardener outside, or
Very
is that
very
not?
little, no worries.
Should I close my window?
Well, you don't have to. It's not that loud.
Okay,
So
okay. I just wanted to make sure.
yeah, don't be sweating
Usually,
that.
usually for synth stuff, I definitely recommend people pick up Serum. It's like $10 a month, and you rent to own. So once you pay it off, it's yours after X amount. But it seems to be a standard. There's a ton of presets. Most people that make presets, Serum is one of the main ones they make presets for.
Oh,
So you'll find a ton of options for that.
and would they just search Serum in the like a
I
Google
think
search?
Splice makes it. So you'd have to go through splice.com and then sign up for Serum. But that's a main one I use. Once Reason added VST support a few years ago, and I was asking a lot of the producer friends I had, like, hey, what are your main VST synths? And everyone said Serum. And using it for as long as I have, and just kind of seeing, always looking at sample packs and preset packs,
Mhm.
Serum was the one that was always present. And there's so many, it's kind of easy to get one, and then you're just kind of stuck with what's available or what packs you can buy from them, while Serum has all these people that are making tons of different sounds. So if there's any tone that you want, Serum's gonna have someone making presets for it. You could of course try to make it yourself, but unless you're good at sound design, that's a little bit more hard.
Yeah, so if somebody's listening to this, they ought to send this video to them and tell them, hey, this guy just plugged you. Give him some free stuff. That would be nice. I love free stuff. What can I say? Yeah, I will say mixing in the box has been or playing around with the box has been so much easier. I have my recording studio in my house still, and even by today's standards, it's outdated. As I said, I went computer based. My computer's good enough, but I mean, my interfaces, I've got 16 inputs, but I'm just using PreSonus FirePods, and those they don't even support anymore. But I'm getting, I use other preamps too. On top, I have an Allen Heath mixer with 18 inputs I use for a different flavor. I have a Focusrite ISA1, which is a fantastic preamp, and you can also use that for your like a direct box for reamping and everything too. So it's been a great tool. But even in my work at home office, I work at home some and I work away some. My work away at home office, I have just a cheap Alesis 8-channel mixing board, and I use a Boss GS10. This is like, I don't even know, I think it's from the 90s or something. And I've gotten some really cool stuff done with it. You know, it's just amazing when I get an idea. I grab my guitar that I leave in the office to play, and so that's why I liked it when you said that. Hey, I can just have my laptop and sit in my bed and play. And that's just awesome.
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
And so, what have you ever got like hit by a rush of inspiration? And said, I gotta hurry up and sit down and do this. How's that work for you?
Not quite. I'll usually play around. What'll normally happen is it might be like 11 or 12 o'clock at night, and I'll be like, oh, this sounds good. And then I'll be like, well, now I think this sounds really good, and I'm gonna be staying up till like 2 or 3 a.m. to see where this goes.
Oh yeah. Have you ever had one of those projects that you thought was gonna be really good? You spent a whole lot of time on it, and you listen to it later, and you're like, oh, this is garbage.
Oh yeah, especially when it's late at night, right? Because then you're kind of sleepy, and you got that tired ear that ain't active.
That's one thing I learned in my career, and I was doing a commercial music for somebody, and I learned the hard way. You got to get away from it, take a day, at least a good chunk of hours, come back and listen to it with fresh ears and get a real realization of what it's like. Because when I was recording it, I thought I did great, and then the guy I needed to bring it to him, I didn't take time to listen to it after that, and I was playing it. Even while I could see the look on his face, and as I was hearing it, it's like I hate this, and he did too. And I gotta give this guy a lot of credit. A lot of people can't handle this in the industry, but you get told sometimes that they don't like things. That's just the way it is in business. And he looked at me and goes, "Dude, this sucks." I was like, "I agree with you. I will go back and redo something.
At least he was straight up with you, right?
Oh yeah, it didn't hurt because I thought it sucked too. It's like, oh, I can't believe I'm playing this. I was like, I want this to stop. Please put the knife in me. I'm done. And so I learned, yeah, like you said, you spend hours on it. You're tired. You think it's great, and sometimes you can still make it something. But it is what it is. Hey, speaking of making things something, have you ever recorded anybody else?
No, I've done a few remixes, which I enjoy doing because you're kind of reimagining a song.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably as close as I've gotten as maybe producing a song for somebody, but never physically. It's hard, man. Like trying to get somebody to sing for you, and then you might not like the way it sounds. So I don't know if I could be that kind of producer where I get somebody in the studio because I'm just very particular. I'd much rather have them just record it, send me over stems, and then I'll put it together, you know?
Yeah. Okay. And are you doing any current work for hire? Like if somebody needs music for an intro video or whatever, do you any kind of work for hire like that?
I've done stuff for friends and things like that for whatever they might need. I did on my Spotify. There's a soundtrack for a friend's short film I did. Gosh, I always forget the name. It's something about like deadly ice cream, Bloody Sunday. Yeah, it's like a Italian inspired horror short that he did. So I did the soundtrack there. I did some songs for another friend's short film. I've done some stuff for friends' YouTube and comic book projects and stuff like that.
Oh, awesome. So you hear that, people. If you want something done for maybe a comic book project, because I mean, a lot of people are using like Indiegogo and Kickstarter, and
Yeah.
they want advertisement videos. Maybe hit you up for that.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, check out his sounds. Do it. I've done some. I don't always ask. I most of the time I say you don't have to credit me. just use it away. Uh, I've done some interesting ones. One of the more interesting ones I did is because I stopped playing and recording for around 6 years. When I had my little girl, there's only so many hours in a day, and I said kids have got to be number one. Now this is two kids, and I put a very big into their schooling, and I still am. But now that she's 7, and they're getting involved in music, it allowed me to get back into it. And after taking that break, I was like, holy cow, has technology changed? And I was rusty because I hadn't played in 6 years, or so. And so I just got the new around, and somebody contacted me, and I was like, yeah, okay, I'll try to make you something. And this is sort of a cool thing, and why I try to tell people, use what you have, but don't be afraid to try new things. Like you have all those plugins and all those things, but I like how you can route it all out and everything, and maybe try just things you normally wouldn't have thought of. So what I did is, I can direct record from my little Boss unit right into my mixer, and I can use impulse responses, and make it sound awesome. But he wanted sort of a bar vibe, and so all I did is I'm using a Sennheiser EA35, and I stuck it on the little Boss speakers. And the little Boss thing only got like 2-inch speakers, and I put it on
Hmm.
there and recorded it, and it just sounded like it was in a crappy rundown bar. It's like that's what I'm looking for. You know, it, it's like who would record like that? Yet I'm sitting here with a wall of amplifiers in my studio, and all these inputs and all the sources and stuff. But I find myself, it's like just try something unorthodox and weird.
That's the fun part, though, right? Is when you really start experimenting and
Yeah,
trying to get something new.
have you ever had one of those like wow sounds that you put together? It's like this is just awesome.
Not quite, unfortunately, just because everything's so digital, right?
Hmm.
Like, I don't know. There's never me really outputting to anything. All I'm really doing is just adding different plugins and tweaking the sound and seeing if I'm getting something that I'd like, you know.
Well, I wouldn't sell yourself short there. I mean, you think with all those plugins, it's just like having hardware. It's all in the box. So you have to go through that, scroll through that, and craft your own sounds. So there's really nothing wrong with that. Let's be honest, most people are all in the box nowadays. A ton of them.
I,
Upward
I
here,
guess when I
expensive.
think about like getting excited for sounds, it usually would be something like, when people tape a microphone to a pan and they hit it with something like, yeah, dude, that's the tone I've been looking for, you know?
Sure. But I don't think you should undersell yourself and undercut yourself because there's still so much trial and error. You can pull that plug-in and manipulate that plug-in with EQ, reverbs, delays, anything under the sun, and turn that into something completely different. So, yeah, so much at your fingertips to keep you busy, I get in trouble. I admit that. One day I spent like 4 hours reamping the same guitar parts. Like, okay, I've got to call it enough.
Yeah, it can get overwhelming, right?
Yeah, and that's not even including the. I was just running through amps and stuff. I have like an 11 rack where I can have a bunch of guitars and I'm inching towards, and I hate to admit this, is I think I'm probably gonna get a Kemper profiler. I know they're old now, but the thought that I could have a bunch of amp profiles in that, make it easy, just sounds great.
Yeah.
But yet, to be honest, there is so many sims and everything and virtual amps now.
That's what I was gonna say. There's digital amps that'll emulate a ton of stuff.
Yeah, and there's some even free ones that just sound fantastic. Speaking of sounding fantastic, maybe we should play your other track here. It's You Conquered, correct?
Okay.
You want to tell us a little bit about it before I hit it, or you want me to play some and then talk about it?
Oh, it was definitely kind of when I was like, oh, maybe I should try doing darker, more industrial stuff. So this was kind of an attempt at that.
So another spin. All right, so here we go. This is going to, it's going to be You Conquered. Cue that up, and here we go.
You came, you saw, you conquered. Your list of demands, you've flaunted. What is your plan? What sees to stand? You came, you saw, you conquered.
Well, there you guys have some of that song there. Just once again, if any of the noise you hear isn't actually in the song, it's in my fan that's running, because otherwise I'd be sweating like crazy in here. So excellent. So there's some of that song. Now you mentioned mastering. How do you don't master your songs much? You send them out for being mastered? Or?
No, I just do a pretty basic mix, just making sure levels are right. I tend to ride the red line, which isn't always the best idea, but it seems to work okay. And for live performance, it seems to come through okay too, because that's kind of another thing to worry about once you start playing your songs on bigger sound systems, is making sure that they sound good for that too. You know?
Yeah, that's quite the challenge. A lot of people don't realize. Even with professional albums, you make them as transferable as possible. But if you play them in a small player, it's going to sound a lot different than in a car. I still go old school. I test all my mixes in the vehicle.
That's smart. I mean, what people should be doing, and what I do anyway, is like, you can definitely use headphones for like a decent, like adequate mix. Check it on speakers, check it in a car, and then see how it sounds after doing all those.
Right. I'm currently looking slowly and getting another set of monitors, but I have studio monitors, and I
Yeah.
run them through there. I also recommend checking your mixes in mono. If I have.
I hear that a lot.
Yeah, it'll help you find mistakes and things that you couldn't hear maybe in stereo. Now, granted, if you have things far left and far right panned, you're going to miss out on some of those, but it's good. I always tell people, if it sounds good in mono, you're probably going to be a lot better off in stereo then too. And so it's a great way to check for those little things. And then so I check it in mono, I check it in stereo. Then I have, which I've never seen anybody else do this, but I have a Parametric EQ hardware hooked up. and I have it set up where it's more flat, like you want to test everything flat. But then I have it where I can just hit a button, and it gives me. I have it set up so it's for a more bassy system. So for those people that are putting the music and playing it in a more system with higher cranked up bass, so I know
Hmm.
how it's going to sound. If like a lot of people tend to bass hype in a vehicle and things like that, so it gives me that transparency. And as I said, eventually I'm going to hook up another set of monitors too, because I can hook up the four. I think the way I have my station set up, but I got to get that next pair. But I like to try it a bunch. Then I find it where it seems like it's translating well. Then, if you want, if you could test it if you have it like a CD, put a CDR to, which a lot of people don't anymore. But if you have something that you could maybe even just I transport it to my phone, and then I can play it into my PA at my house because I have a PA in my studio for practicing, and then I'll run it down to the car. So I test and test and test, which can be daunting, but it helps it transfer well.
Yeah, it'll at least give you an idea of what's going on.
And that's another thing I found too is when I went from recording like on a 4-track cassette, an 8-track, and then a digital 24-track, it was so much easier to mix in the box for some reason.
Hmm.
Now
I mean,
I'm
with
still old
reason,
school.
it's all laid out with those modules, so it can be kind of tricky trying to dial knobs and hear some of the changes that are occurring, especially if you're not someone that's kind of attuned to slight like frequency changes and things like that. Like
Yeah,
there's definitely a lot you can miss in some of that.
but I find it for me overall it's easier. Part of it's the speed though too, because for example I loved my Roland 2480, but to test a mix, you had to burn it to a disk, a CD. And I'd use CD rewritable, so I didn't have to waste or anything. But still, that took like 15 minutes of waiting time. Now I click render, boom, it's done.
I tend to just upload it to SoundCloud, and then I'll just private all my songs, and then I can listen to them there
yeah,
wherever.
yeah, it's awesome. Uh, just amazing. And then see, your like you said, SoundCloud. So most years when you're doing it, you're doing your mix then for streaming and things like that. And there's differences too than if you're going to do it to CDs. And a lot of people don't even bother with CDs anymore.
Yeah, I was recently looking into doing like vinyl pressing
Mhm.
for a release, and then I heard, oh, you have to mix it a special way for vinyl, and I was like, oh no,
Yeah, you can't overpower it because the needle would jump and stuff like that. So
oh my
it's a
gosh.
whole different thing. And I'm not keen enough to do that for vinyl. I know about it, read about it, but I haven't done it for vinyl.
Yeah, I don't know if that's something I could handle.
But I've done it for mixing for streaming. I've done mixing for back in the day for like cassette, and I've done mixing for CD. Yeah, but each one is different, and that's where some of the software is great. So I mean, if you're looking to want to mix on your own, you might want to try that Isotope 9. Just wait till you can find it on sale. It's amazing.
Yeah,
I even like the where you can pretty much use a template. You have a certain song that you want it to sound like. You can have it so you can pull that up and it'll analyze that, make it that, and you can use its things to select vintage if you want it to sound vintage or modern, and then you can put how high the LUF level is for depending on the media, if it's going to be CD or streaming, so you can adjust all that, and then you can do EQ adjustments and everything on top of that. It's just amazing what you can do, and not have to, like when I was doing it originally, you had to run it through a ton of rack, and that was rack gear. Unless you had a ton of money, the rack gear is not all equal. you know it, and as I said, gear is just so much better priced today. Back then, even in the '90s, if you heard Behringer was a joke.
yeah,
No offense to people that had Behringer, but if you have that, that's like the budget gear, and they were
yeah. It was the
notorious.
cheapy stuff.
Yeah, and they were, and the reason they were is because not necessarily the most sound business practices. They would get the equipment and they'd reverse engineer it, so people would make jokes like a Behringer book on a photocopier, of somebody else's tech, and but man, now I'm not saying all their stuff is great, but they've done a lot of great stuff for a cheap price. It's like I can't believe this is that cheap anymore.
Yeah, I think they finally kind of figured out what they should be doing.
Yeah, but I think just uh, the way it is of they've acquired a lot of other companies too. But it's same with a lot of other tech companies. A lot of the tech is just a lot cheaper now than it used to be. We can do a lot more with chips and things. Like Line 6 amps sucked, sound wise. I mean, you got great for intro. No offense to anybody. Sorry, I don't mean to be that way. For an intro level though, they were fine. But if you went and you go, oh, I'm going to record at the studio, and you bring your Line 6 Spider too, they're going to be like, oh, let's put that to the side.
Yeah,
Let's do something else. And now they've got like the Helix and everything else. It's like, holy cow, that thing sounds great.
Speaking of mixing, a friend introduced me to something today called 8D. Have you heard of this before?
Not that I'm aware of.
I highly recommend just going to YouTube, putting on your headphones, and listening to 8D music. I don't know how it works. I want to look into it. Basically, it's like 3D but for audio, where it's like using spatial reverb and stuff to make it sound like the music's revolving around your head and parts are playing in different areas in your
Okay.
room. It's
So,
super trippy.
so it's surround sound composed music, which, by the way, you could do that on the box. You could do that with Reaper. You probably could do it.
But I mean, like more surround. Like I can't describe it. You just got to check it out. It's very odd.
Okay.
I don't know how it's done. You don't need any special headphones, which is even weirder to me. So it's just something in the mix that they're doing.
Well, you heard it here. Check that out. I'll definitely check it out too. And speaking of checking things out, I've had you for an hour, so I don't want to keep you too long. Once again, where can they check out your stuff and tell a little, about how they can get it? I want to make sure anybody that's stuck it through here knows, hey, I want to check out more of this guy's music. I want to hear more. Where do I get it?
Just Geist OverDrive anywhere you're at. Spotify, SoundCloud, Bandcamp. I'm all over the place as Geist OverDrive. iTunes as well.
And if they want to contact you for, say, hey, I want to do an intro for Indiegogo Kickstarter campaign for a comic book or something, where would they contact you at?
Probably the best way for that's on Twitter. I'm normally known as Full Custom Hot Dog. Very big contrast of names there, but because I make YouTube content as like reviewing horror movies and stuff. But that's mainly where my Twitter presence is there as a Full Custom Hot Dog.
And can I ask, where did the name come from for Full Custom Hot Dog?
It sounded way cooler in my head, but it's got a good flow.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with it, right? Nothing wrong. A good hot dog is always nice, and hey, a good customer service is essential for a hot dog stand.
I also didn't want a name that was like horror movie Blu-ray channel. I didn't want something that's just like, here's what I talk about. I just wanted like a persona.
Sure. Oh, trust me, I'm not great at naming. I mean, look, I'm Captain Frugal for crying out loud because I'm cheap. Everyone knows me. He's like, this guy is always thrifty as can be.
But it sums up what you're doing, right?
Yeah, it's what I try to do. I collect comics on a budget. I like gear and I like all this stuff, but I try to say, hey, you don't have to spend top dollar if you just watch what you're doing out there and things. And right now, for you and everybody else, I think we're going to be, let's be honest, it's probably we're going to hit a recession. I'm not going to get political into that, but economists are leaning towards it's the direction we're going, which means if you're okay financially, now's going to, within the next probably month or so, you're going to start being able to get some good deals on gear. Especially, keep check out your pawn shops, your Facebook marketplaces. I mean, I sound like a dick here because I'm a bit of a vulture, but when people need money, that's when you get your gear cheap.
That's the first thing to go.
Yeah,
Is your gear.
whether it be you need an audio interface, a computer, a new laptop to record it on, a microphone. Although microphones, I tend to like to go new. Just be very careful with those on microphones. Things like that. Though you can get a great deal. And that's my goal. I think my goal is to try to get a Kemper for like $1,000 or under. So, we'll see if that pans out. Well, at this point, I want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today and having this talk. I hope you enjoyed those songs, those clips there, and check out his music and things. Do you want to share anything else today?
No, thank you so much for having me, and thanks anybody for listening.
All right, well, everybody, thank you for your time. If you don't mind, help support the channel. We have a Patreon, a Subscribe Star. We even have down there a link for a one-time donation with Streamlabs if you just want to help out there. I think throw a couple bucks to the channel to help keep the equipment maintenance and all that stuff because it does run up in a bill. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Until next time, keep it frugal.